So good afternoon, everybody. It's so great to see you all on our second of the four classes series for Shir Hashirim, for the Song of Songs. If you recall, we began last week with an introduction and a general explanation about what the Song of Songs are about, a book, as we said, that had some controversy within the Bible, the Tanakh, and how the rabbis were hesitant to include it within the Ketuvim, the writings, the third portion of the Tanakh, and how Rabbi Akiva came to save it and say, if these books are holy, Shir Hashirim is the holiest of all books. And the way that happened was basically by making sure of reading this as an allegory, not in a literal sense, the love between a man and a woman, but rather between God and the children of Israel. And I was also adding that in my own perception, even though I thought that the part of the literal seemed to fit better, in our days with LGBTQ community, the idea of this love is much more general and more encompassing is the word. And so we talked about all these issues and how to work them out. And now, and I also said to you that we're going to be focusing on different topics. There are 8 chapters to the book, and in 4 sessions, it would be too complicated to go over everything. But I chose 4 subjects. The first was introductory. The second one, the one that we're going to cover today, is love in Jewish tradition, and more specifically in the Song of Songs. And then next week, we're going to be discussing women in the Song of Songs. And finally, we're going to look at the association of Shir Hashirim to the holiday of Pesach, of Passover. If you recall, in many communities, on the second day of Pesach, Shir Hashirim, the Song of Songs, is actually sung, chanted. We looked at the chanting as well last week, and we also talked about how in some communities, mostly Sephardic and Eidot HaMizrach of Oriental communities, Shir Hashirim is also sung, also chanted in the time that precedes Kabbalat Shabbat, the idea of love, of the idea of a dodi. We'll see in a minute about what all that is about. The idea of a beloved. You, of course, remember the famous phrase, I am my beloved, my beloved is mine, ani ledodi vedodi li. We'll touch upon that as well. So we're going to begin, as many times I do, sharing a recording. In this case, the recording is a recording that is in English, so I think you don't need the translation for it, but we will talk about it in a minute. Let me know if you can't hear this.
Let me be a seal upon your heart, like a seal upon your hand. Let me be a seal upon your heart, like a seal upon your hand, on your hand. My love is as fierce as death, passion is as mighty as shore. Its darts are darts of fire, a blazing flame. That's what cannot quench quench love, nor rivers drown it, nor rivers drown it. Let me be a seal upon your heart, like a seal upon your hand. Let me be a seal upon your heart, like a seal upon your hand, on your hand. My love is as fierce as death, passion is as mighty as shore. Its darts are darts of fire, a blazing flame. Fast words cannot quench love, no rivers drown it, no rivers drown it. Let me be a seal on your heart. Let me be a seal on your heart. Let me be a seal on your heart, a seal on your heart, a seal on your heart.
Okay, you hear this is a live performance. I'm going to stop the sharing. Let me just read for the sake of us. Let me be a seal upon your heart, like the seal upon your hand. For love is as strong as death. Passion is mighty as Sheol. Its darts are darts of fire, a blazing flame. And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to be so one thing that is fascinating about Jewish tradition, of course, is that there are ways of looking at a text. There is an acronym called Pardes. Pardes means an orchard, but Pardes means also, I'm going to write it on the chat for you. Pardes. Pardes meaning, let me see, the P for shat or pshat, the literal translation of a text, the r for remez, that means an allegory, the d of drash, that means an explanation of different things, and finally the s for seter, meaning something that is hidden. I'll just put it in here for you to have it. I can't, unfortunately, PRDS, Pardes, right, would be with the acronym. And the idea is that we can actually be able to look at things in different ways, right? So the literal meaning would be one of them, but also an allegorical way, like if it would be comparison, or with sometimes the drash, meaning where you're looking at two different things and you make sense of them, right? So for instance, if you have in the Torah the fact that in one part in the book of Shemot says, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remember the Sabbath, and then in the book of Deuteronomy of the Devarim says, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, observe the Sabbath. You're saying which one is right? So here comes the drash, the explanation, and says that one without the other is incomplete, right? And so one way of looking at it literally or would be to say that God spoke at Mount Sinai, both of them, and some people heard one and some people heard another. And the drash, the explanation would be, well, if I remember the Shabbat but I don't observe it, then that's incomplete. And if I remember, observe it, but I don't remember what the importance of the creation and the connection to God is also incomplete, that would be a drash. And then finally, the seter, the idea of something heathen, is that there are elements like the mystics would remind us over and over and over, the idea that there are things that are beyond our understanding and that we perhaps one day will make obvious, but not necessarily so. So in this case, I'm going to look at two commentators, Rashi, as we said last week, a commentator from the 13th century southern France, and then Rabbi Steinsaltz, a modern contemporary commentator. So let's see what they say about this. Remember, let me be a seal. So Rashi says, for the sake of that love, seal me upon your heart so that you do not forget me and you will see me. So in other words, what is the implication here for Rashi? As we said last week, he reads this book. In his opinion, the only explanation is that this is not a relationship of love between a man and a woman, but rather between God and the children of Israel. And so he's saying, for the sake of that love, love that is not a contract, but a covenant between us. What is the difference? It's not based upon something, but rather the love between parents and children, right? That we love them no matter what. It's not that they stop being our children because they actually went astray or they actually said something bad to us. They still continue being. So for Rashi, to seal, let me be a seal upon your heart, is, of course, a seal, that something that we will constantly and forever have together, right? And then this verse 6 of chapter 8, the last of the chapters, says, for love is as strong as death. The extent of my love, Rashi says, that I love you is to me equal to my death, for I am killed for your sake. This is a very interesting idea. We're going to look into that more in extent very soon. Is that the idea that I can die for love? And that's a good thing. Well, if you're a romantic and you say, I'm dying for you, right? Does it really mean that I'm dying? No, you're not dying. Carol is smiling. She says, well, no, maybe you're not dying, but this is the expression of giving everything, even death for you, right? So that's what Rashi says. And then what does it say? Passion, right, is as so it's interesting. The word ahava, that means love in this, in the reason for our session today. Ahava kasha ki sheol kin'a, right? And in the translation, in a more liberal way, is passion is mighty as Sheol. Love, in the sense of passion, is as mighty, right, as strong as Sheol. Sheol being that place, perhaps a physical place. Not everybody agrees on it, but the place where really one gets to death, right? And Rashi, interestingly enough, he translates not as love or as passion, but he translates as jealousy. Jealousy is as harsh as the grave. He says, considers Sheol as the grave. And look at what it says, the quarrel that the nations were jealous and quarrel with me because of you. For Rashi, the idea of the a nation, the Israelites were the chosen people by God, is something that for him, Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, the idea that you have chosen us over everyone, is something that Rashi believes in. And so he says, the quarrel that the nations were jealous, the other nations, and quarrel with me because of you. And then he says, kin'ah, in every place in the Bible, means an expression of conveying feelings with vengeance. So he's talking about something very, very strong, and that's why he calls ahava kasha, meaning jealousy. And then he says this idea of esh shalhevetya, the fire from the flame of God, the fire from the flame of God, coals of a strong fire that come from the force of the flame of Geinom. Geinom, another place for Sheol, right? The cantillation symbol, and then he goes into more technicalities. They says that the cantillation teaches that the word esh is connected to shal hevetia, esh shal hevetia, meaning fire from the flame of God. I'm gonna stop because Michael, do you have a question?
Just a comment that in historically in a number of English language poetic traditions, dying was a synonym for orgasm.
Wow. Thank you so much. I didn't know that. And that explains it very, very well. So this is Rashi's version of this verse. This is what Rabbi Steinsaltz in the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, is going to say. The woman asks us of her beloved, set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. So Steinsaltz is taking the literal meaning, not between God and the children of Israel, but rather this is that the woman in Shir Hashirim, the Song of Songs, ask of her beloved, set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. Of course, some of you may see of this. I'm advancing here because I know that you're beginning to get it. When it says as a seal upon your heart and as a seal upon your arm, what are you thinking of? It's something that is also related to the love for God. Where of the tefillin, if you remember the phylacteries, I translate into a Greek word that hardly anybody understands what it means anyway, but apparently it's more accessible to people than the word tefillin. Phylacteries on your arm and on your heart, right? Or rather, you say, oh, but it's on my head. Well, if you remember in the Bible, the heart and the mind are one, right? Are one, and therefore we are not discriminating between the two. But it sounds a little bit like that. And Steinsaltz continues saying, let me be like your seal, a personal item unique to you. This is another symbol of the increasing permanence of their bond. So powerful is the woman's devotion that she wishes to relinquish her independent existence altogether. Clearly, Steinsaltz is not a feminist, isn't he? We're going to see later on, if you are patient enough with me, about other versions of this when we look at them next week. I'm not endorsing, by the way, of any of this. I'm just finding fascinating how different commentators would see different things. So Steinsaltz says, so powerful is the woman's devotion that she wishes to relinquish her independent existence altogether, preferring to attach herself to her beloved as a seal. Meaning what? meaning that the woman is not an independent anymore. She wishes to become part of her beloved to the point that she becomes his seal. And then, of course, he says, there is, however, another side to this, as love is as intense as death. That he explains it. Love is as intense as this. Alongside the delights of love, there is also a dark side. Just as death swallows everything and cannot be deferred, so too the feelings of love are so overpowering as to be inescapable. Furthermore, jealousy, he reads with Rashi, ahava kasha, love, intense love, right? Jealousy is as cruel as the grave, as cruel as the grave. Why? Because they have a problem considering that ahava, love, can be as strong as death. So they translate that as jealousy. Rashi talks about the jealousy of the nations. Let's see what Rashi says. Steinsaltz says this refers to the demand for exclusive possession of the object of one's love. So he is in Freudian times. So what is he saying? He's saying something very, very profound, that when you actually want to possess the other person, not to make him feel I see. Christina says seal, also translated as a signet, right? It's a term used to refer to a seal or stamp, usually one belonging to a king or other ruler. It was used as a symbol of authority. It could be used to make official documents or mark items of value. Thank you for that. Some of them are reading, if you're reading it in the traditional sense. Actually, the person we're talking here is King Solomon Melech Shlomo. So the idea of what Christina is bringing here, apropos to a king or a seal of a stamp, right, that fits for a ruler, to a king or other ruler, fits very well. Understood allegorically, Rabbi Steinsaltz says, the jealousy that is built into love for God, who demands complete devotion, is very difficult for other peoples to comprehend. To the nation of Israel, the relationship with God is not only its most important bond, but the only thing in the world that matters. This feeling is as harsh, as absolute, and uncompromising as the grave. It sparks, the sparks of love are the sparks of, you guessed it. When he talks about sparks, he's talking about the sparks of fire, which can burn and even destroy a person. Look at what he's saying. So not only he's comparing, or the verse is comparing as death, but also as Sheol, right? More specifically, are going, but also both Steinsaltz and Rashi are reading this as something that is consuming. Consuming, love can be consuming. Love can be consuming as fire. And if you think about it, think for a moment as we are going to enter Shabbat, and we're going to conclude Shabbat with Havdalah. If you remember, for the Havdalah, the ceremony of separation between the Shabbat and the other days of the week, what was one of the main items for the Havdalah? The candle. But not just any candle. Irene, can you please tell us what you're telling me? Unmute yourself and explain.
It's like entrelace, a kind of candle, like the challah, kind of wavy.
Right, so it's a weaving candle, indeed. I love how you do that. I can't do it, but you should show everybody. It's amazing. I love it.
It's like a gang symbol.
Yes,
I want to
so
join.
it's great. It's great. So the idea of this candle is a candle that has a number of wigs, right? It has a mystical aspect, of course, of 3 wigs and 3 different candles interrelated. But what is the symbol for this candle? Is the candle of redemption. And if you remember, in some traditions, what happens when we light this candle and the candle is lit? What do? We actually look at our nails, right? We don't look directly to this candle. Why don't we look directly to this candle? And we look at only at the impression of the candle, of the brightness of the candle, but not of the candle per se, because that light of redemption is so powerful.
It's like staring into the sun. You're not supposed to, right?
Yeah, or closer to our time, to an eclipse, right?
The only time you can look.
Yes, and the idea is that it can burn us. We will become blind. And that's why the expression, isn't it? That love is blind. Love is blind because it just, not because his love is blind, we can talk about that extensively, but the idea that is so powerful. The passion is so powerful that can actually blind us. That fire can really burn us. And then comes the next verse that I'm going to read first in Hebrew for you and then translate. That would be chapter 8, verse 7. If you want to look at that, I see that many of you are already checking and what have you, which I love that. So this verse 7 is a verse that I have to say is one of my favorites. One of my favorites is in fact so beloved by Roan, my wife, and I, that it was inscribed in our ketuvah, in our matrimonial seal, right? And contract. And it says, Maim Rabim, vast floods, lo yuchlu lechavot et ha'ava. Vast floods cannot quench love. They cannot quench it. Unearot lo ishtefua, and no rivers drown it. Im iten ish et kol hon beito be'ahava, if a person offers all his or her wealth for love, boz yabuzu lo, he would be laughed to scorn. He would. So if you were to offer all your wealth for love, you would be laughed for scorn, for scorn or to scorn. So what is the part that we liked about? Of course, not the end of it, but the idea that Maim Rabim, that the vast waters, right? Lo yuchlu lechavot et ha'ava, cannot quench the love. So remember that if the ahava, if the love is a fire, then this is thing. Oh, therefore, since we're getting close to Pesach, right? So what is Chad Gadia telling us? That the water quenched the fire. Remember? Chad Gadia, yeah? Coming to our theaters. If you remember, we are beginning to announce this Shabbat. What do we announce? The month of Nisan, not to confuse with the brand of a car, but rather the first month of the year according to the Torah, the month of Nisan. Christina is approving, I'm glad. So this is good. And then one can say, why is it that Rosh Hashanah doesn't happen on the month of Nisan? Because the month of Nisan is the month of our liberation, but we were not free yet. We weren't free. And in fact, Tishrei is the beginning of the universe, of the entire universe. And there is admittedly in Judaism this perhaps a tension between what's universal and what's more specific. Yes. And so let's look at what Rashi is saying about this verse. If love is true, much water cannot extinguish the fire of that love, and rivers cannot wash it away. Even if a person were to give all the wealth of his house for the purchase of love, he would be scorned. Now we understand. Because what is Rashi explaining? That no, you cannot buy love. You cannot buy love. Sometimes people think that they can. And in fact, the opposite is true. I know of people with great wealth, monetary wealth, that have big problems finding friends. Why? Because they think that people want to be with them because of their money and not because of the quality of who they are. So they are constantly suspicious. Are they with me because they want something from me and not because they love me, right? So Rashi is explaining it. If you have all the wealth of your house for the purchase of love, you will be scorned. You'll be laughed at. Like, what do you think? You can buy that? No, the Beatles said, no, you can't buy me love, right? Right, exactly. So by means of gestures, gifts, and displays of emotion, one can acquire a certain level of friendship, but not love. But not love. So what is the proper form of the love of God? Haha. If we are beginning to look at this book as an allegory between God and the children of Israel, what is the proper form of the love of God? If you remember, last week we were talking about this idea that in Judaism, we don't associate love as part of our relationship with God and with other people, even though the Torah includes 36 times the idea of loving our neighbor and loving the stranger. We don't associate that. We think that's part of Christianity. God is love, is Christianity. And I want to put a good publicity because Irene is having a play in New York City. Do you want to tell us what's
thank you. Thank you, Ramón. Yes, I will be presenting our love story with my husband in a play, a musical, original called Oi Father. It's the love story of a Catholic priest with the Jewish Cantor. As you can imagine, I'm the Jewish part of the,
right.
of the cup.
Thank you. So that's the idea, right? That we associate what? That God, when we say God is love, what is it? Jesus, right? We're not talking about Judaism, even though we have Ahavat Olam, Ahavat Rabbah, the great love. We love God as yourself, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, as many mitzvot related to love. But what do we do? So let's see what happens. What is the proper form of the love of God? It is where we should love Adonai with a great, overpowering, fierce love, as if he were, or if God were, love sick. For a woman and dwells on this constantly. And it is to this that King Solomon, refers allegorically when he says, "For I am love sick." For the whole of the Song of Songs is a parable on this theme. Who says this? None other than Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimonides, a doctor, a philosopher, a giant of Judaism. He has something called Hilchot Teshuvah, And this is great. Where does he talk about love? He talks about the laws of repentance. So love is associated, and he goes to say, he takes the Song of Songs, in this is chapter 2, verse 5, when he talks, I'm gonna say it for you. Samchuni va'ashishut, radfuni batapuchim, ki cholat ahava ani. I translate, sustain me with cakes, with raisin cakes, refresh me with apples, for I am lovesick. And I want to say something that is very interesting. You know, it's talking about apples, right? An apple is another of those fruits that can be taken, in this case, associated with love. And then you perhaps understand something about what happens in the creation of the world, right? If you remember, there is a tree. What is the tree? The tree of, who can help me? The tree of knowledge.
Knowledge.
Of good and bad. How is normally, those of you that love art? Oh, Monique is saying, why do you say it's an apple? Aha, I'm coming, Monique. Stay with me. So what is that you see when we're talking about this tree of knowledge, of good and bad, of good and evil, we talk it, sometimes we call it, right? Maybe that is a hint. That tree is represented in art many times as what? As an apple tree. Yes? Do you have seen this before? Now think about it. In the Middle East, are you going to have apple trees? No way. There are no apple trees. So why would it be that in Christian sources, the tree is indicated as an apple tree? Because the apple is what? And that's what...
European.
Say that?
European.
Is European. Yes, it is European indeed. But it is also the sense, what happens when you eat an apple is the apple of what? The apple of the libido, the apple of that love, of that, what we call irrational instincts. Yes, that's where we look at that, and that's why that tree is. And there is another linguistic reason of Italian. The idea of male, of bad, becomes mela, which means apple in Italian, in modern Italian, but that's a different story altogether. We don't have to go into that. But the idea is, refresh me with apples, right? Rafduni batapuchim ki cholat hava ani, because I'm sick, chole, I'm sick of love. So this is something that I want to look in extension, because it interests me. We talked about love and death. We talk of love as the grave, and now I'm sick of love. And when we talk about being sick of love, we don't say I'm sick of you. This is not what we're saying. I'm cholat ahava. You know,
Say I'm sick with love instead of love.
Yes, thank you, Monique. I'm sick with love. Yes, right, with love. And commentators talk about so many different things. For instance, in the Talmud, you have this idea in the name of Rabbi Levi that says, in the past, when a pruta, a coin of value, was easy to obtain, in the same way, the soul of human beings desired to listen to words of Mishnah and Talmud. But now, when it's not easy to obtain, and people are subjugated to Roman persecution. Now, remember that the Talmud, 2nd century, right, is strongly associated with the Roman persecution in the land of Israel. The only material that they wish to hear are words of blessing and comfort. And when it's talking about the Jewish people, what is that we're saying? The Jewish people said before God, Master of the universe, all of the sicknesses, the difficulties that you bring upon me, they are to make me that much more beloved in your eyes. In other words, you put me into so many obstacles. The Jewish people are saying, you made me into so many trials that when I pass them, then I believe that you love me more for that. Those trials are, listen to this, Isurim shel ahava, Isurim shel ahava, tests that inspire greater love. I want to see, I think that Rick is telling us something. Oh, yes. I'm sick of love, that I'm in the thick of it. This kind of love, I'm so sick of it. I see lovers in the meadow. I see silhouettes in the window. I'll watch them till they're gone. And they leave me hanging on to a shadow. I'm sick of love. I hear the clock tick. This kind of love. Oh, I'm lovesick. Bob Dylan. Thank you for that. That's great. That's really awesome. Okay, so this idea of Isurim shel Ahava, these trials of love, tests that inspire greater love, mean that in the Talmud idea is what? That these obstacles make us, the bond between God and us, the love between us, closer and closer to God. Because think about something. When something costs you, when it's hard for you to obtain, don't you love it more? When it comes easy, you say, no problem. But when you really have to work at it, then you really feel for it. And then another idea. This is an alternate interpretation. Master of the universe, all of the sicknesses that the nations of the world bring unto me, that is because I love you. Jews play the role of the suffering servant, like in the book of Isaiah. And their courageous and uncompromising love of God in the face of the hostility and danger ends them the wrath and persecution of other nations of the world. Now, it's not about love between the obstacles that God puts in front of us, but who's putting the obstacles, the tests? The greater nations of the world. And I know, Mike, you said Google points out that Apple in Latin is malum, which is close to the word for evil, for malem. Male, right? Exactly. So there you go. I didn't read Google, but I read Italian, old Italian, Petrarca, and he knows this thing. So very good. So now, what is it comparable to? This is comparable to a prince who has recently recovered from an illness. His tutor says to his father, the king, allow him to resume his lessons. The king says, my son's healthy coloring has not as yet returned, and he should resume his lessons? Rather allow my son to recover for 2 or 3 months with good food and drink, and then afterwards he can return to his studies. So too, and this is one of the relationships to Pesach, so too with the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, they should have immediately received the Torah. Did they? No. However, There were among them those who were adversely affected by having had to make the mortar and bricks, right? Remember the mortar and bricks? What is the mortar and bricks at the Seder? The charoset, the mortar and bricks, demanded of them by the Egyptians. And God said, the healthy glow has as yet not returned to my children's faces as a result of the mortar and bricks, so how can they receive the Torah at this point? Rather, let them enjoy themselves for 2 or 3 months with the manna and water, and afterwards they can receive my Torah. Meaning, in this case, that the Torah is the seal upon our hearts. The Torah is the love of our lives, right? The love of our lives. And there are many, many, many different explanations about all this. But I want to take you to what Rambam. So one of the things that I always say is paradoxical, that children, I call them children, at the time in the Middle East, they were men and women, 13 years old, they have a bar or bat mitzvah, right? And basically, the concept is they have learned everything about Judaism at the time, which means they are now part of the community. And therefore, after that, what happens? It's over, right? In fact, the famous joke about the rabbi that tells to the mouse, you became bar mitzvah, and so the mouse never returns, right? So very good. So the idea is that kids feel that when they are 13 years old, they have mastered Judaism. We have not yet become to get to the maturity of what, for instance, Rambam, Maimonides, is going to do in his Mishneh Torah, this very, very, very provocative book that is related, connected to different parts, Hilchot Torah, Hilchot. It talks about different parts, that things that we need to know. And I go back. Remember, we were talking about Hilchot Teshuvah, and about this the principles for repentance. And he says one should love with an extremely great, powerful, and excessive love to the point where one's soul becomes attached to the love of God, resulting in his or her thinking of God constantly. It is like one who is profoundly infatuated to the point where his, her mind can focus on nothing other than the beloved. So we are commanded with all your heart and with all your soul. Of course, you know those words on the book of Devarim, Be'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha. And Rashi says, what's meodecha? My money, right? So we remember that we have to use material things also for the sake of love of God. And what that he says, that's precisely what King Solomon intended when he wrote, remember we said that according to tradition, this is the first book that King Solomon, Melech Shlomo, writes when he's young. And so he says, because I am lovesick. And all of Shir Hashirim, in capital letters, he says, all of Shir Hashirim is a parable concerning this subject. Aha. So this is all what's about. It's about becoming lovesick of God. And he goes on, because he says, he takes an approach that is very intuitively very difficult for us. What's difficult about it? I'm going to stop. When you said to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your financial means, what's hard about it? I'm stopping. I want you to tell me. Is it hard? Can we love so completely and absolutely? Can we become so close to God? I guess you're saying no, because otherwise you would have said yes. You're saying no, and we are all saying no. It's almost unattainable. The tradition says only the tzaddikim, the very, very righteous people, are able to get that close to God. And some say, don't get too close, because you will be burnt out, right? So it's very interesting that we looked at moral philosophers that claim that the external causes of love, poetically represented by classical poets as the 5 arrows of Cupid. Remember, in the Greek times, Cupid was the god of love. There are 5 human senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. The Jewish understanding of God's incorporeality, that means God doesn't have a body, makes impossible conceiving our love for God through such means. How can I love God with sight? Can I love God through sight? If God doesn't have a body, how can I see? But I can see something else. What can I see? I can see God's creation. And if I think of God's creation as God, I mean, to a certain extent, God is not only creation, but we can see something of that. We can capture, when I'm looking at my beautiful plants beginning to grow, I'm saying God's in them, right? When Christina is having lamb in her farm, God is there, right? So it's one way to see God's love, but it's true. It's impossible to capture, right? So how is that the emotions that reflect the infatuation with the divine, right? And of course, the resultant extreme of fear for what? Aha, rejection, of abandonment. Remember? Because in love also that happens. What if we love God completely and God doesn't love us? Does it happen that? Of course, those of you that studied with me Tehillim, Psalms, remember, right? That all the times my eyes suffer away from affliction. They say in Psalm 88, I call to you, O God, each day. I stretch out my hands to you. Why, Adonai, do you reject me? Do you hide your face from me? Right? Remember the book of Esther. Esther, from the word astir, to hide. God is hidden. Is God there? Yes, but we can't see. Is God present? Yes. And in fact, as we're going to approach later on, when we remember Yom HaShoah, what would we say about the time of Nazism? With the Psalms, God, why lama azavtani? Why have you abandoned me? I loved you completely and you abandoned me. And that is a whole story, a whole topic to discuss, but briefly just to say the figure of God in the world has been diminished by so much hatred, so much misunderstanding, and right? So when God's figure is diminished, Sheol intervenes. The idea of death is actually present. And I wanted to finish with this physical affection, like the king of Persia, love for Queen Esther. There are other words, Hebrew words, that are more specifically refer to physical desire or sex, ahava in a broader concept, right? The idea that Queen Esther is loved, meaning that God is loved, right? Esther, right, is love. Ahava, love in a broader concept. Romantic love, meaning included in the command to love one's neighbor, even though this is not the love, the romantic love is not is the love that we make the emphasis upon. And I wanted to end with a song, that is actually sung by Rabbi Akiva, the Rav, if you remember, that said, Shir Hashirim is the holiest of all books. And this is what he sung. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Akiva, Ve'ahavta l're'acha, l're'acha kamocha, ve'ahavta l're'acha, l're'acha kamocha. Ze klal gadol, gadol v'Torah. Ze klal gadol v'Torah. What's all this? Amar Rabbi Akiva said, Be'ahavta le'reacha, to love your neighbor as yourself. Ze klal gadol v'Torah is the biggest principle of the Torah. The biggest. He says the central portion of that, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, is so sweeping, an essential principle of the Torah, because with that in mind, we can continue in our relationship with the world. In other words, these two concepts between our relationship, bein Adam lamakom, between us human beings and God, and bein Adam lechavero, and between a human being and one's neighbor in the universe, in the world. If we can do that, we can also love God. But those that say, I only love God, but I don't care about everybody around me, don't believe it. It's not true. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. If you have anything that you want to comment, by all means, but I just wanted to liberate you from the fact that I know I'm a little bit over 1 o'clock, and I know that everybody has to prepare for Shabbat and to do other things. So I wanted to close it here with this idea of love encompassing to universal love. So thank you, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. And,
Thank you.
Yes.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank
Shalom.
you.
We'll see
Shabbat
you
Shalom.
next week.
Thank you.
Of course, we'll see you next week. And we're going to continue then, concluding with this idea of love. And of course, we're not going to end it with now. When I see how that is also expressed in women in Judaism. And I hope you eat a lot of apples.
Exactly what I'm eating right now.
Thank you, Ramón. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thanks,
Thank
Ramon.
you so
Have a
much.
good week,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thanks,
Christina.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.